Welcome to Dark Horse Auto and Diesel. In this video I'm going to show you how to replace a clutch in a Ford Focus with the 2-liter single overhead cam SPI motor. If you have a dual overhead cam motor, it's probably going to be significantly different. You might be able to follow along with that. I'm not 100% sure. I've never done a clutch on a dual overhead cam motor. But if you've got an SPI motor like this here and you need to replace your clutch or remove the transmission for any other reason, you can follow right along. This should be relevant for any Focus that has this engine in it. So the first thing we're going to need to do is get the thing jacked up off the ground and supported safely, because we are going to be working under here. The body's a little too rusty for me to use the pinch welds with the jack stands, so I have to go up here to the subframe. And if you don't know how to safely jack up a car and support it, I would highly recommend you do that before you start getting involved with this job, because something bad happens. This will kill you if you're very unlucky, and even if you're kind of lucky, you might still do a digit delete.
I used to laugh at safety. Now they call me Three-Finger Joe.
Or best case scenario, it just falls on the ground and damages your brake rotors or something. But either way, learn how to do it. Now, a lot of the stuff that we're going to be doing here doesn't have to be done in any particular order. I'm just going to do things here in the order that I find easiest and what I remember first. And I have ADD, so that might play a part in it too. First thing we're going to do is remove the battery, and that's simple. 10mm for post here. Just loosen that up a little bit. Then next we'll remove our battery hold down here. Another little disclaimer here. This car has been worked on by several different people of varying levels of competence. So some of the stuff on here might look different than yours just because of the history of the work done on this car previously, which ranges mostly somewhere between half-assery and complete fuckery. So I feel like my battery hold down is going to be significantly different than yours. Mine's 7/16. Yours is probably going to be an 8mm, but I think you can figure this part out. Then just grab a hold of the battery and lift it out. Next we'll remove our air cleaner assembly. Just unplug the mass airflow sensor here. And then what I like to do is actually remove it from over here. That way this isn't just dirty dangling here getting in our way when we're working down in this area. So we'll just come over here, and this should be a 1/4 inch clamp. Just grab a hold of this and wiggle it off. Now we should be able to just grab a hold of this whole assembly here and just kind of pop it out of there. It's just held on by little rubber grommets. These little dingers go into the rubber grommets. One of mine's already broke, so it came out easier. Then you want to take and put some tape or stuff a rag down in here. Keep your 10mm socket from getting lost down in there. I mean, the throttle plate's closed, but it just makes it that much better if there's even less possibility of stuff falling in there. Because if you lose something down in this intake manifold, you're probably never going to get it back out, because it goes like way down and then comes back up. Things get stuck in there pretty easily. Next we'll remove the battery tray. There's 2 bolts down here and one right here. Those are going to be 13mm. And then there's going to be some wires and stuff that are hooked to it. Your positive battery cable might be clipped to it. You can just kind of squeeze that together, give it a little push, and I got to cut that off. Next we can get this wiring harness off the transmission here. There's a plug down here. That one might be easier for you to get underneath depending on its orientation for the release. You just push down on it and then follow it on up. There's this big connector right there, that gray one. I'm gonna need both hands for that probably. You can see the tab there that you gotta push down on to pull it apart. I honestly have no idea how my camera is sitting still right now. It's pretty much defying physics where it's sitting. And then there's another connector. I have to find it. You gotta push way down in here. And this is for your speed sensor. Get to where we can even freaking find it. If you have trouble finding it, find that gray plug, and then this little wire that comes off of it here. Just follow that on down. And it is right down here. Difficult to see, but these are the shift cables right here to give you an idea where it's at. And you should be able to just kind of pull it on through. And just try to remember how it was routed so that you can get it back to where it goes later. And for now, we'll just let this hang off to the side out of our way. It's not required at this point, but then we can, since we're up here, just pop a couple of these little clips off of here. Just get all of them you can reach, and then we'll get the rest from the bottom later. And keep in mind, if yours is anything like mine and, you know, has had the level of crappy work done on it like this one has, a lot of this stuff might not even be in the right spot, and you might have to kind of refigure out where it all goes and actually have it in the right spot, because I don't think this is even right the way it is right now. You just have to have some trial and error when we can put it back together, but we'll get to that part. The next, what I like to do is get all the brake fluid out of our clutch line here. And the way we do that is, here's the bleeder for it. We'll just take the little nipple off of it here, or a little cover off. And then I actually have a vacuum brake bleeder that I can hook up to it, and that'll just pull all the fluid through it and out of the reservoir. It will not pull all the brake fluid out of the reservoir. It'll only pull it out to a certain point, because the clutch actually pulls off the reservoir higher up than what the brakes do. So you don't have to worry about sucking this thing dry. And if you don't have a vacuum brake bleeder, what you can do is just stick a hose or something on the end of that bleeder and run it down into a bucket, because you really don't want brake fluid getting all over everything, because it is actually really corrosive. And if you have an epoxy coating on your floor like I do, that's, you know, pretty much coming apart, but it'll end up peeling that off of the concrete. I know because I've done it. So try to keep your brake fluid contained, and that's what we're going to do right now. Now these bleeders, they always seem to be different sizes. On mine, 11 fits the best. It still fits kind of crappy, but what I'm going to do is get it broke loose first. Then close it back up lightly. Then we'll get our bleeder hose attached to it. And don't forget to unscrew the cap. Just leave it sit like that, it'll be fine. Now we'll open the bleeder up. And then I'll just open the valve on this. And I'm just going to let it suck all that brake fluid out of there. And like I said, it will not empty the reservoir. It'll only take it down so far, and then you'll be fine. Which that's actually kind of convenient, because it can tell you if you have a clutch problem. On this exact car, I've had to replace the slave cylinder inside the bell housing before. The way I knew that was because the brake fluid kept getting low and the clutch would just quit working, but the brakes still worked fine. So it's kind of a safety feature there, so that if your clutch does fail, you still have brakes. And I'm just going to keep the vacuum pulled on this until fluid stops coming out. There, we can hear it starting to suck some air. I'm going to keep it on there for a bit, just to try to make sure that that whole line is pretty well dried out. Try to keep the mess to a minimum. Then once you've got that sufficiently emptied out, now we can take the clutch line off of the slave cylinder there. And there's a little clip, that little metal clip right there. We're going to pop that out, and we can pull this whole thing out. You don't actually need to unscrew this. And make sure you lose it like I did. That makes things convenient for reassembly. Found it. Not sure how it ended up all the way out there, but whatever. Just set that somewhere where you'll probably lose it again. And then you can just pull this thing right out of here. And obviously I've got a rag there to collect any brake fluid that might come out of it while we're messing with stuff. Now we'll just pull it out of this little holder here. Just lift up on it. A little rubber grommet should come out of that holder. And then we'll just kind of prop it up out of the way somewhere. That'll work. Next we'll remove the starter, and that's a little funky. from the top, there's actually two that go in this way, and then we'll get the other one from the bottom. It comes in from this way. Not sure why they thought that was a good idea. And it's pretty difficult for me to show you on camera where they're at. That one right there, that's on the screen there, that's one of them. And the other one's gonna be kind of over in here, buried behind this crap, the EGR tube and stuff. Those are the two that you're gonna take from the top. And then the third one is actually pretty easy to get from the bottom. So we'll take these two out up here. And all three of those bolts are gonna be 13 millimeter and just a 6-inch extension and a shallow well socket. Seems to be what I find works best as far as getting access to them. There's one. There's two. And the third one, I'm under the car now, is going to be the top one that you see there. The bottom one is one of the transmission bolts. And I'm not going to be able to show you that on camera. And then once that bolt's out, we'll just take the starter and just kind of slide it back out of the way. All right, so I got that bolt out, and I don't have the starter slid back too far. You just need to get it back far enough to where it's out of the way. You can kind of see what I got going on there. There's a couple inches of clearance in here. And you can just let it sit there and it'll be perfectly fine as long as it's out far enough to be out of the way. Now that I'm crawling around under here, it appears that the left axle seal is leaking. So we're going to be replacing that while we're in here as well. And while we're down here, we might as well just pop the rest of these off for this shift linkage cover. And since we're down here, we'll go ahead and pop the shift linkage off. And you just need to get behind it and just gently pop it off. That one we'll just cut the zip ties off. And then once you have the linkage removed down there, you just take this and you just give it a twist. And then slide it out of the bracket. You'll do that to both of them. Then since we're down here working in this area, we'll go ahead and remove this here, the tow hook thing. It's not 100% necessary, but it definitely helps later on when we go to actually take the transmission out of here. And these are going to be 18 millimeter. Now we need to start working on getting our axle shafts out of the transmission. So first thing we need to do now is get the tires off, and that's going to be 19 millimeter or 3/4. And just a little pro tip here, I always like to thread the fasteners back onto where they go, just a couple turns. That way I don't lose them, and there's never any question where they go back to. Now we need to take the caliper loose from the front brake assembly here. There's these little metal clips here. You might be able to get those by hand, you might not. And then you've got two screws. There's one here and then one right down here. Those are going to be a 7 millimeter Allen head. Then you can use the wrench or socket, whatever you got here, to kind of pull those out just a little bit, just to make sure they're out of the way. And get something to hang the caliper with, be it a tarp strap or piece of wire or something, because we do not want to let the caliper hang from the hose. If you let the caliper hang from the hose, it will damage it, most likely. Then we just get in here and just kind of pop it off. Then you can just hang it from the spring or something else, just to kind of let it hang out of the way, but not hang it on the hose. Next, we need to loosen the axle nut here. I don't have any metric sockets this big, but 1.25 inches seems to fit quite well. And I'll put the metric equivalent to that up on the screen here. Then make sure the shaft is loose. And depending on how rusty it is, you may need to tap on it with a hammer. Do not hit directly on the end of the axle shaft here with a hammer. You'll end up mushrooming this out, and then you can't get your nut back on and you're screwed and you gotta buy a new axle shaft. So just take a punch, and there's a hole there that lines up pretty nice. Just tap on it. They also make a tool that fits over the studs here that you can use to push that out. I've never used one. I've just always used a punch and a hammer into that hole. Now we need to pop the ball joint loose from the knuckle. And on this side, that is a T50 Torx bit. And then on the other side over here, that's a 15 millimeter. Then we'll tap that bolt out of there. Again, being very careful what you do with the end of this so you don't mushroom the end out. If you have to, you can stick the nut back on it. This one I just had it off recently, so it's going to come right out for me. You may have to be a little more persuasive with it with a bigger hammer, but just be careful with it. Then just pry down on this, pickle fork or whatever, carefully pop this. There's a little thingy sticking up inside of here. That's just a pinch bolt that we removed. And then you can slide the ball joint out of the knuckle here. And this part is going to be extremely frustrating if the person that had this apart before you didn't put grease on that, and if it's also been there for many, many years. You may need some penetrating oil. You may need to get in back behind here with a punch to kind of spread this apart. Thankfully mine's already pretty loose, so I don't have to worry too much about it, but you may have a lot of difficulty here. Alright, we're loose. And you can take the rotor off too if it helps, like I did, just to be able to see things and get it out of your way. So now what we'll do is we'll push down on the control arm here, and then just kind of work this out of the way a little bit. And basically what we're going to do is work the knuckle out this way while we push the axle shaft back that way. And one thing that'll help too with getting a little bit more movement out of the knuckle down there is to come up here to the top and loosen up your 3 strut mount bolts. You don't have to take them all the way off, just loosen them up a bit, and that'll give you more room to swing it. And you may need to unclip this up here off of the brakes, and that just slides right out of that bracket there. Now we can go ahead and pop the axle shaft out of here. And as you can see, somebody in the past definitely broke some stuff out trying to get to it. There is a special tool that you can get that works with a slide hammer to pop these out a lot easier. Most times I just use a pry bar gently and kind of tap on it with a hammer just to kind of get it to pop out. Typically works pretty well, and you're going to want to get a suitable drain container for you. The kid's old Halloween trick-or-treat bucket ought to work nicely. It's her car anyway. Sometimes these pop out real easy, other times they don't. And all I'm doing is just putting some moderate tension on it, and then just gently tap on it with a hammer, and usually it'll pop out of there pretty easily. Just got to be patient with it. And sometimes if you just kind of tap on the pry bar a little bit, it'll pop out. Then once you feel it pop loose, you can just kind of work it out of there. And this transmission here, the IB5 that these SPIs use, holds roughly 2 quarts. I think it's 2.1 quarts. So just make sure your drain container is big enough to hold that much. And then everything you just saw, we'll repeat that on the other side, except for one difference, and I'll show you that right now. Now here's where this side differs from the other side. On the other side, you had to pop it out from the transmission. On this side, there's this strap here that's obviously not on the other side. And there's two nuts on it. There's one up here and one here. These are 13 millimeter. You'll take those out, and then you can just pull the shaft right out. There's no circlip holding the shaft into the trans. Next, while we're down here, we'll take our torque mount off here. These are all going to be 13 millimeter bolts. We'll take this one off down here, and then, not that one, leave that one go. There's one here, here, and then right up here. Take those three out, and then this whole thing will come out. Now, keep in mind that when you take these bolts out, the engine and transmission assembly may move a little bit, and you may actually have to move it yourself to get this to come out. But it's pretty easy to do. Just don't freak out when it moves on you. All right. Keep that threaded in a few turns for the time being. This is a good time to replace this if the bushings are looking pretty crappy. Mine don't look too bad. It's good enough for a 16-year-old's car that it's probably going to be back in the shop in a week again with something else broken. The next thing I'm going to do is remove all the bell housing bolts except for two of them. And so that means we'll take these ones out here, come up, we'll leave this one. I like to leave the center two bolts on both sides for now. So that means this one will come out. There's a couple up top, which I'll show you as I'm taking them out. And then go back over here to the back side. And that one right here near the starter, we'll leave that one for now. You can go ahead and get it broke loose just to make sure, but just keep it a little bit snug for now. And by the way, these are all going to be 13 millimeter, and a ratcheting wrench is going to be your friend for a couple of these, especially these two. Damn! Fuck me running. Yours might not be quite as easy as this one because somebody in the past has already cut this part out for me so that you could actually get to this. If it isn't like this, I would recommend you just go ahead and cut this out carefully, because trying to get all this crap apart and having to take the exhaust apart and stuff, it's not going to be a good time. So just cut this out and then you can get access to this bolt. And if you want to, you can actually notch this out a little bit too. I'm probably going to do that here in just a second because this is irritating. Safety squint, engage. Aww. Oh yeah, much better. Chances are those bolts won't come all the way out. Doesn't matter. It actually makes a pretty convenient spot to hang on to them for you so you don't lose them. This angle probably sucks for you, but my camera's pretty much sitting on the floor, so I can't see what's on the screen. But all I'm doing now is this on the back side. I'm gonna just break this bolt loose. I'm not actually gonna loosen it up completely. Just make sure it's free and then just put a light snug back on it. Yep. And then the same deal with this one. Break it loose, gently snug it back up. Because here in a few minutes, those are going to be the only two bolts holding the engine and trans together while it's being suspended up here. Damn! What the fuck? Now we'll get the rest of these from the top. This one right down here, that's the one that we just worked on. So then there's one right here. We'll take this one completely out. And then there's a couple more up top here. I'm going to try to show you exactly where they're at here. It's a little difficult. There's that one there. Technically, that's not where the ground cable's supposed to go, but like I said about previous work done to this car, there's a lot of that kind of stuff going on here. And there's another one off to the right of that. And there's the other one. And that should be all of them, except for probably one or two that I forgot, but maybe not. Then just go around and make sure they're all out, except for those two on the edges. Next, what we need to do is support the engine, because we got to pull the motor mount off the transmission. And all I've done here is just put a floor jack underneath the oil pan with a block of wood to spread the weight out. Do not put a whole lot of pressure on this, just enough to hold it. So as you're jacking up on it, as soon as you see the motor start to move a little bit, just stop right there and you're fine. Now, ideally, they do make a tool that kind of hangs over all of this that you can support the engine with. If you have one of those, great, use it. I don't, and I imagine most people probably don't. And if you do, you probably work in a shop and you're not watching this video anyway. So a jack will work, just be careful with it. And then what we're gonna do is take these nuts out here, these four, and this one, and then this piece will lift off of here. These outer ones are going to be 15 millimeter. And the center one is 21 millimeter. Now, if you're unsure of your securement underneath, you might want to take this out slowly by hand instead of just hitting it with an impact like I just did. Because if you don't have everything secure, the whole motor and trans is just going to drop and hit the floor. You may need to move the engine and trans around a little bit, get this slid off. There we go. Next, we'll take this bracket off of here, and that's just held on by two 10 millimeter bolts. And don't forget to unclip your wires. Next, we'll take the three nuts off that hold the bracket to the transmission. Those three right here. Those are 18 millimeter. If that happens, don't worry too much about it. Not a big deal. Just keep in mind where they went, and when you run them back in, it should be perfectly fine. If you want, you can try to get that nut off of there. Not a bad idea, but you do what you want to do. Then don't lose this little bracket here, and just remember that it goes on the fastener towards the engine. Now if you decided to do the right thing like I did and get the nut off of that, you can snug that back in. That's an external Torx bit, and it's an E11. Just take and thread it in there. And then if you have the E11 Torx bit, just kind of gently snug it up. Don't get it super tight. You don't want to damage anything. Just lightly snug, perfectly fine. If you don't have the E11, you could probably get some vice grips or something on the top, or maybe find a wrench that'll work. Just make sure you get it to where that unthreaded part is just touching the top of the trans. And if you're curious how I got it apart, all I did was just stuck it in a vise, just making sure that the unthreaded part there is taking most of the force. Get it in there pretty tight, and then just take the impact to it. Just run it back and forth a couple times, maybe spray a little WD-40 on it, not everywhere else, but good as new. You can see there's pretty much no damage done to the threads. So next what I'm going to do, I'm trying to do this quickly because the way this is hanging right now, it's putting a lot of strain stress on the motor mount over there that it's not really designed for. It's not going to hurt anything, but I'd rather not leave it like this for long. But what I'm going to do, I've got a chain here, and I'm going to hook it up to this stud, but I need the cables to give me a free and clear path. So what I'm going to do is unhook this guy here, and then this here, just take a 10 millimeter, take that off. Now we can get stuff out of the way a little better for us. Now we've pretty much got a clear shot. So what I've got going on here is not entirely necessary. This transmission only weighs about, I think about 80 pounds. So it's not heavy. It's entirely possible to muscle this thing out of here by hand. I know because I've done it many years ago on the same exact car actually. But I'm working here by myself, so if something happens, I get hurt, I'm pretty well fucked. So I'm just using the engine lift here. Got that chain hooked up to that stud. And I'm just going to use that to remove this transmission here. So now that we've got it all supported, those two bolts that we left in, I'm going to go ahead and take those out. I'm not going to show you that on camera. I think you can figure that out. And then I'll get this thing removed from here. A couple things I want to note real quick before we take this transmission off. That bolt down there, if you have the catalytic converter still in place, as you probably will, that bolt will not come all the way out. Perfectly fine. And also, if you're doing this the way I am with the engine lift here, you'll probably have to relocate the jack stand depending on where you had it originally. I did. I've just got it back here on that part now. So now we can get this thing loose from the engine. Kind of explain what I'm going to do here beforehand, and then you can just kind of watch as I do it. I'm just going to get in here and get the transmission slid back from the engine, and you might have to get in there in between the engine block and the bell housing with a pry bar and gently pry on it a little bit, depending on how long it's been since this has been apart. Just be careful with it and just get it slid back just far enough, and then we're gonna just kind of finagle it around a little bit and get it lowered down to the floor. Now, as you're pulling the trans back, keep an eye on your reveal between the bell housing and the block, and try to make sure it's even all the way around, because if it's getting difficult and not wanting to come out, you may have it on a little bit of a bind. So just adjust your engine lift and stuff like that to where it's pretty well even, and it should come out a lot easier. Now once you've got it out so far, you'll probably notice that you're hitting on the subframe down in here where the differential is on the trans. And it's kind of hard to show you, but right down in there it's hitting. So what we're going to have to do is rotate the transmission towards the front of the car in order to get it slid out a little further. And you can maybe see that I've got it kind of up on that a little bit now. So now we just need to keep rotating it a bit and working with it. You may have to move the engine up and down a little bit to make clearance. And that's all for part 1. If you want, go ahead and click the link that's on your screen now or in the description for part 2, where I cover replacing the clutch itself and also reinstalling the transmission. If this video helped you, make sure you hit the like button. That tells the YouTube algorithm to show it to more people so it can actually help more people. And also consider subscribing if you like this content and want to see more of it. I will see you in part 2.